I served the same quiet man coffee for 3 years. He always sat alone, left exact change, never spoke. Then one December night, he handed me an envelope that changed everything. What I discovered inside wasn't money. It was something that would expose the biggest secret in our small town. If you want to hear how one envelope revealed a billionaire's hidden world, smash that like button, and let's dive into this incredible true story. My name is Sarah, and 3 years ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was 28, a single mother to my 7-year-old daughter Emma, and I was working double shifts at Mel's Diner in our small industrial town of Millbrook. You know the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, where the biggest excitement is when someone gets a new car or when the high school football team wins a game. I was barely keeping my head above water. The rent was always 3 days late. My car made sounds that would make a mechanic cry, and Emma needed so many things I couldn't afford. But I kept telling myself we were making it work. We had to make it work. That's when he first walked into the diner. It was a Tuesday morning, around 10:30, right after the breakfast rush had died down. He was probably in his early 60s, with silver hair that was perfectly neat, and clothes that looked expensive, but not flashy. He chose the corner booth, the one where truckers usually sat because it had the best view of the parking lot. He ordered black coffee, just black coffee. No cream, no sugar, no breakfast to go with it. He paid with exact change, $3.50, including a $1 tip. Then he sat there for exactly 45 minutes, reading newspapers he'd brought with him, and left without saying another word. I figured he was just passing through. Our town wasn't exactly a destination, more like a place you ended up when you took a wrong turn off the interstate. But the next day, there he was again. Same booth, same order, same routine. By the end of the week, I started setting aside the corner booth for him, even though he never asked. The other customers started noticing too. Millbrook was the kind of place where a new face stuck out like a sore thumb, especially someone who dressed like he did. His watch caught the light sometimes, and I could tell it was expensive. His shoes were leather, real leather, not the kind you buy at discount stores. But then he'd get into this beat-up Honda Civic from the early 2000s, and everyone would scratch their heads. Old Pete, who came in every morning for his coffee and gossip, had theories. "I bet he's running from the law," Pete would whisper. "Rich guys don't drive cars like that, unless they're hiding something." Martha from the post office thought he was a private investigator. "He's always reading those newspapers like he's looking for something specific," she'd say. But I started noticing other things about him. Small things, like how he'd hold the door open for elderly customers without making a big show of it. Or how he left his umbrella by the door when it was raining, like he was saying anyone could use it. Once, I saw him help Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries to her car, and when she tried to thank him, he just smiled and walked away. What really got my attention was how he seemed to show up on my worst days. The morning after my car broke down, and I had to walk 4 miles to work, there he was, staying an extra hour, like he somehow knew I needed the company. The day Emma got sick, and I was worried sick about missing work, he left a $5 tip instead of his usual $1. I started wondering who this man really was. But in a town like ours, asking too many questions was considered rude. So I just kept serving him his coffee, and he kept leaving his exact change, and we settled into this strange, comfortable routine that felt like friendship without words. Everything changed when Emma started getting sick. At first, I thought it was just regular kid stuff. Stomach aches, being tired all the time. But when she started losing weight and couldn't keep food down, I knew something was seriously wrong. The pediatrician ran tests, then more tests, then referred us to a specialist 2 hours away. The specialist used words I'd never heard before and showed me x-rays that looked like someone else's child couldn't be mine. Emma needed surgery. Not the kind you could put off or hope would fix itself. The kind that had to happen soon, or things would get much worse. The insurance company had other ideas. They denied the claim. Something about it being a pre-existing condition, even though Emma had never been sick a day in her life before this. The surgery would cost $15,000. $15,000 I didn't have, couldn't borrow, and couldn't even imagine getting. I tried everything. I called every financial aid program, every charity, every family member who might help. I picked up extra shifts until I was working 16 hours a day. I sold everything I owned that had any value. Emma's father had disappeared years ago, leaving no forwarding address and no way to contact him. I was completely on my own. That's when the quiet man started paying more attention to me. I don't know how he knew something was wrong. I tried so hard to keep it together at work, to smile for the customers and pretend everything was fine. But somehow, he knew. He started staying longer during my shifts. Instead of his usual 45 minutes, he'd sit there for 2 hours, ordering refill after refill. He began asking gentle questions. "How's your day going, Sarah?" he'd say. And something about the way he said it made me feel like he actually wanted to know. One afternoon, when I was having trouble hiding the tears after getting off the phone with another insurance representative who couldn't help, he asked if I wanted to sit down for a minute. "You look tired," he said simply. I found myself telling him everything. About Emma, about the surgery, about how scared I was and how alone I felt. He listened without interrupting, without offering advice I couldn't use, without making me feel like a charity case. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said finally. "Cancer. I spent every penny I had trying to save her, and it wasn't enough. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was feeling so helpless, so alone in the fight." He looked out the window at his old Honda. Sometimes the people who understand your pain the most are the ones you'd never expect. From that day on, our conversations became real. I learned that his name was Robert, that he had no children, no family left. He told me he'd been successful in business, but that success felt empty after losing his wife. He never talked about what kind of business, and I never asked. In a place like Millbrook, people's past was their own business. But I noticed things. His tips got bigger, not dramatically, but enough that I could buy Emma the medicine she needed to manage her symptoms while we waited. He started bringing newspapers for other customers too, like he'd bought extras and didn't want them to go to waste. Small gestures that seemed casual, but felt intentional. December came with the worst blizzard our town had seen in years. The roads were impassable. The power kept going out, and hardly anyone was brave enough to venture out. I almost didn't open the diner that night, but we needed every dollar I could make. Robert showed up anyway. His old Honda somehow made it through snow that had stranded pickup trucks, but something was different about him that night. He seemed nervous, checking his watch every few minutes. He ordered his usual coffee, but barely touched it. The diner was almost empty. Just me, Robert, and old Pete, who'd gotten stranded when his truck wouldn't start. Around 9 o'clock, Pete's son finally came to pick him up, leaving just Robert and me in the storm. That's when Robert stood up and walked to the counter. He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket, a thick manila envelope that looked important. His hands were shaking slightly as he handed it to me. "Sarah," he said, "I need you to do something for me. Don't open this until you get home tonight. And tomorrow at 8 p.m., I need you to meet me at the address inside. Come alone, and trust me." Before I could ask any questions, he put on his coat and headed for the door. At the threshold, he turned back and looked at me with the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "Everything is going to be okay," he said. Then he walked out into the blizzard. I stood there holding that envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. It was thick, not thick enough for money, but thick enough for documents. Important documents. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it over the wind outside. When I finally got home that night, Emma was asleep, and the house was quiet. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, afraid to open it, but more afraid not to. Inside, I found a brass key and a piece of paper with an address I recognized, an old warehouse on the industrial side of town that had been abandoned for years. There was also a note, written in careful handwriting: "Meet me here tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. Trust me. Your friend, Robert." I stared at that note for hours. Part of me was terrified. What if this was some kind of trap? What if the gentleman I'd come to trust wasn't who I thought he was? But another part of me, the part that was desperate and running out of options, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the answer I'd been praying for. Emma's surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. I had 3 days to find $15,000, or watch my daughter's condition get worse. What choice did I really have? The next evening, I drove to the warehouse with my heart hammering in my chest. The address led me to the old Millbrook manufacturing building, the one that had been shuttered when the jobs moved overseas 15 years ago. I'd driven past it 1,000 times, never giving it a second thought. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. There were lights on inside, and cars in the parking lot. Not just a few cars, dozens of them. My hands were shaking as I parked and walked toward the entrance, the brass key clutched in my sweaty palm. The key turned easily, and a side door I hadn't even noticed was there. I stepped inside and couldn't believe what I was seeing. The warehouse was buzzing with activity. There were people everywhere. Volunteers sorting through boxes, families receiving bags of groceries, children playing in a corner that had been set up like a daycare. This wasn't an abandoned building. This was some kind of distribution center, organized and efficient, and clearly running a major operation. Tables were loaded with food, clothing, toys, and what looked like medical supplies. Volunteers wore matching t-shirts that read, "Second Chances Foundation." I stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sarah." I turned around, and there was Robert. But this wasn't the quiet man who sat in the corner booth at Mel's diner. This Robert was clearly in charge. Volunteers were coming up to him with questions, clipboard in hand, treating him with the kind of respect you show someone important. "I owe you an explanation," he said, and led me to a small office overlooking the warehouse floor. The walls were covered with photos. Families smiling, children graduating, people holding keys to new homes. In the corner was a simple desk with a computer and stacks of what looked like financial documents. "My real name is Robert Chen," he began, and something about the name sounded familiar. 3 years ago, I sold my tech company for $2.8 billion. The number hit me like a physical blow. Billion. With a B. I sat down hard in the chair across from his desk, trying to reconcile the man I knew with what he was telling me. After my wife died, I realized that all that money meant nothing if I was going to sit alone in some mansion, drinking expensive wine and feeling sorry for myself. So I decided to do something useful with it. He gestured toward the warehouse floor below us. This is one of 12 distribution centers I've set up across the region. We identify families in crisis, people who are working hard but still can't make ends meet, people who've been knocked down by circumstances beyond their control. We help them get back on their feet. I found my voice. But why the secret? Why pretend to be someone else? Robert's expression grew sad. Because the moment people know you have money, everything changes. They see dollar signs instead of a person. They want things from you, or they treat you differently, or they assume your money makes you better than them. I wanted to know who you really were, Sarah, not who you'd be if you knew I was rich. "The diner," I whispered. "You were watching me." "I was getting to know you," he corrected, and what I saw was someone who worked twice as hard as anyone else, who treated every customer with kindness, even when they didn't deserve it, who was raising a beautiful daughter on her own and doing an incredible job despite impossible circumstances. He opened a folder on his desk and showed me a stack of photographs. Me serving coffee, helping elderly customers, laughing with Emma outside the school. Not creepy surveillance photos, but the kind of pictures someone takes when they're documenting a good deed. "I've been watching you for 8 months, Sarah. Watching you struggle and never complain. Watching you give your last dollar to the church collection, even when you couldn't afford groceries. Watching you work 16-hour days and still find energy to help Emma with her homework." My throat was tight. "Why me?" "Because you remind me of my wife. She used to say, 'That character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when you think no one is looking. And you, Sarah, have more character than anyone I've ever met." He pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. "Emma's surgery has been paid for. The hospital received a donation yesterday that covers not just the operation, but all of her follow-up care for the next 5 years. I couldn't speak. The relief was so overwhelming that I started crying right there in his office, ugly crying that I couldn't control. All those sleepless nights, all that fear and desperation, and it was over just like that. "There's more," Robert continued gently. "Emma's college education has been fully funded. When she graduates high school, she'll have a scholarship that covers tuition, room and board, and living expenses for any university she chooses." "I can't accept this," I managed to say through my tears. "It's too much. I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to pay me back," he said. "I'm asking you to pay it forward. I need someone I trust to help me identify other families in need. Someone who knows this community, who can spot the difference between people who need help and people who want a handout. I need a partner, Sarah. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the warehouse. All this money, all these resources, they're meaningless if I'm making decisions from some ivory tower. I need someone with their feet on the ground, someone who sees the real world every day. What are you asking me to do? Keep working at the diner. Keep being yourself, but also be my eyes and ears. When you see a family in trouble, a single mother who's working 3 jobs, a father who lost his job through no fault of his own, tell me, help them. I looked down at the warehouse floor, at all those families receiving help, and I understood. This wasn't charity in the traditional sense. This was someone who had been given incredible resources, finding a way to use them responsibly, thoughtfully, effectively. "There's just one condition," Robert said, turning back to me. "This has to stay between us. When I come into the diner, I'm still just Robert who drinks black coffee and reads newspapers. The moment other people know who I am, everything changes. I lose the ability to really know the people I'm trying to help." I nodded, understanding completely. What happens if people find out? Then I disappear, and all of this ends. The foundation continues, but I go back to being a recluse in a mansion somewhere, and people like Emma don't get the help they need. The weight of the secret felt enormous, but so did the opportunity. Not just for Emma and me, but for all the other families who were struggling the way we had been. "So when I see you tomorrow at the diner," I said, "you're still just Robert. And you're still just Sarah, the best waitress in Millbrook who makes the perfect cup of coffee." We shook hands, and I felt like I was shaking hands with destiny itself. Emma's surgery was a complete success. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery, and that with proper follow-up care, she'd never have to worry about this problem again. Watching her wake up in the hospital bed, seeing color return to her cheeks over the following days, was like watching a miracle happen in real time. But the real transformation wasn't just in Emma's health. It was in how I saw the world around me. Knowing Robert's secret was like putting on glasses for the first time. Suddenly, I could see things I'd never noticed before. The elderly man who came in every Thursday and always ordered just toast and coffee. Robert quietly paid his electric bill when it was about to be shut off. The young mother with 2 kids who worked at the grocery store but could barely afford to shop there. Her rent got mysteriously paid up for 6 months by an anonymous benefactor. I became Robert's scout, his connection to the real struggles happening in our community. When I noticed that the Miller family was having trouble after Jim lost his job at the plant, I mentioned it during one of our coffee conversations. 2 weeks later, Jim got a call about a new position at a company that had just expanded into the area. The salary was exactly what he'd been making before, and they were impressed with his experience, even though he'd never applied. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Beautiful, because people were getting help they desperately needed. Heartbreaking because I realized how many people in our small town were hanging on by a thread, one emergency away from losing everything. Robert and I developed a system. During our conversations at the diner, I'd mentioned families casually, how the Johnsons' car had broken down, how Mrs. Peterson was worried about her grandson's school expenses, how the fire at the trailer park had left several families homeless. He'd listen, ask gentle questions, and take mental notes. Within days, or sometimes hours, help would appear, always anonymously, always in ways that preserved people's dignity. A mechanic would call about a special discount program. A scholarship opportunity would be announced. Emergency housing assistance would become available through a nonprofit no one had heard of before. The warehouse became my second home. 2 evenings a week, I'd go there after my shift at the diner and help coordinate the distribution of aid. I met the other volunteers, people from all walks of life who had been touched by Robert's generosity and wanted to pay it forward. There was a retired teacher whose grandchild's medical bills had been paid, a factory worker whose house had been saved from foreclosure, a single father whose daughter's college tuition had been covered. Each of them had a story similar to mine. Each had been helped by Robert during their darkest moment, and each had been asked to keep this secret and help identify others in need. It wasn't just one billionaire giving away money. It was a network of people who understood struggle and wanted to prevent others from experiencing that same desperation. The hardest part was keeping the secret. Every day at the diner, I wanted to tell people that their guardian angel was sitting right there in the corner booth, reading his newspapers and leaving exact change. When customers complained about rich people not caring about regular folks, I had to bite my tongue. When they wondered why good things never happened to good people, I wanted to shout that they did. They were happening all around them. But I learned something important about generosity during those months. Real giving isn't about recognition or gratitude. It's about seeing a need and filling it, regardless of whether anyone ever knows you were involved. Robert taught me that the most powerful acts of kindness happen in silence, away from cameras and social media and public praise. Emma started thriving in ways I hadn't seen since she was very young. Her health was perfect, but more than that, she was happy. She could run and play without getting tired. She could eat whatever she wanted without getting sick. She started talking about college, about becoming a doctor so she could help other sick kids. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with those serious eyes that kids get sometimes and said, "Mommy, I think we have a guardian angel." "What makes you say that?" I asked, because everything got better all at once. And Mrs. Henderson at school said that's what guardian angels do. They make impossible things possible. I kissed her forehead and smiled. "Maybe we do, sweetheart. Maybe we do." The irony wasn't lost on me. The richest man in our town sat alone in a corner booth every day, and most people thought he was just some lonely old guy with nowhere else to go. They couldn't see that he had the biggest heart of anyone I'd ever met, that he was using his wealth to quietly transform dozens of lives. I realized that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's measured in lives touched, problems solved, hope restored. And by that measure, Robert Chen was the richest man I'd ever known. That was 3 years ago. Robert still comes into the diner every day at 10:30. He still orders black coffee, still sits in the corner booth, still leaves exact change with a $1 tip. To everyone else in Millbrook, he's still just the quiet man who keeps to himself. But I know better. I know that in the past 3 years, he's helped over 200 families in our region. I know that 43 kids are going to college who wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise. I know that dozens of medical bills have been paid, hundreds of jobs have been created, and countless emergencies have been resolved before they became disasters. Emma is 10 now, healthy and strong and excited about her future. She talks about medical school like it's a given, not a dream. Because for her, it is a given. Her education is secured, her health is protected, and she has opportunities that most kids in our town could never imagine. Sometimes I catch Robert watching her when she comes to the diner after school to do her homework. There's something in his expression, pride, maybe, or hope, like he sees in her the future he's helping to create, one act of kindness at a time. The secret we share has become the foundation of an incredible friendship. We talk about everything now: books, philosophy, his late wife, my hopes for Emma's future. He's become the father figure Emma never had, and the mentor I never expected to find. But the most important thing Robert taught me is that kindness exists in the most unexpected places. That guardian angels don't always announce themselves with trumpets and halos. Sometimes they drive old Honda Civics and drink black coffee and pay for miracles with exact change. Robert taught me that the most powerful acts of kindness happen in silence. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that guardian angels are real. Subscribe for more untold stories of human kindness, and remember, the person sitting next to you might just be carrying a secret that could change everything. What's your story of unexpected kindness? Have you ever encountered someone who turned out to be more than they seemed? Share it in the comments below, because stories like these remind us that hope is real, that good people exist, and that sometimes, when we need help the most, it appears in the most surprising ways. The next time you see someone sitting alone, someone who seems ordinary or unremarkable, remember Robert Chen. Remember that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wear kind hearts and carry the power to change the world, one cup of coffee at a time.